Hi everybody. Today we're going to work on lesson 8-6, solving quadratic equations using square roots. So what we're going to start with is solving a quadratic equation, which we worked on last week. So my first example is a review example. So first of all, a quadratic equation is an equation where there's an x squared as your highest exponent. So in the case of this first example, x squared equals 36. Now I told you last week when we solve a quadratic equation, our first step is to get the equation equal to 0. So what we would do here is we would subtract 36 from both sides, and so we would write the left side horizontally. So x squared minus 36 equals 0. All right, now what happens here is we have to decide what kind of factoring we're going to do. So this is x squared, which is a perfect square, and 36, which is also a perfect square. So we're going to do difference of perfect squares. So what happens here is you double bubble, set those double bubbles equal to 0, and we are going to have x plus 6, x minus 6. From there, we take each of those factors and we set them equal to 0. Okay, when we do that, we're going to solve each little equation here. So you get x equals negative 6 and x equals 6. So there are two answers, or two things that make this equation true. X equals negative 6 and 6. Those two answers, when substituted into the original equation, will give you a 36. So what I want to do is I want to show you another way of solving this. This only works for quadratic equations that have no middle term. So there's no x term. So here's what I mean. X squared equals 36. See how there's an x squared, but there's no x term. So in this case, and this case only for quadratic equations, we actually don't have to get the whole thing equal to 0. What we can do is we'll undo the square. So undoing a square on x squared is taking the square root. The square root of x squared is x. What we do to the left, we do to the right. Now we get the square root of 36, which is 6. So we have x equals 6. But if you recall, go back to the other way of doing this, we got a 6 and a negative 6. Well, the reason this happens is when you take a square root of something, when you're solving a quadratic equation, you're going to name the solutions plus and minus 6, meaning positive 6 and negative 6. And I'm going to show you why quickly. If I substitute a positive 6 in for x here, I get 6 squared equals 36, so 36 equals 36, so that checks. What happens if I sub in a negative 6, though? So I'm going to put a negative 6 squared equals 36. Well, negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36 also. So when we say the square root of 36 is 6, that's fine unless you are solving an equation. Then you have to show that you have a positive and a negative 6 that works, okay? So you don't have to show the check on each one. You just have to remember to put a plus and a minus in front of whatever the square root is. Okay, so let me try another example here. Let's see. 5x squared 5x squared equals 20. Okay, so we are going to get x alone, okay? Just like we've always done it with old, linear equations. So the first thing to get this x alone is to divide by 5 on both sides. This is called isolating x squared. All right, so now we have x squared by itself, isolated, equals 4. Now, to undo that square, we take the square root on both sides, and we get x equals, well, this is the square root of 4 is 2, but remember, it could be a positive 2 or a negative 2. So we write it like this. What it really means is x equals 2, x equals negative 2, okay? Plus or minus 2. It's a short way of writing that, and that was example 2. I'm doing 5 examples today. All right, third one. Oh my goodness. We'll try that again. 3x squared minus 75 equals 0. Okay, so there are two ways to do this. We could divide out a 3 on each of these, but we also can solve by getting x squared alone. So let's just do it that way. So we're going to add 75 to both sides, just like a regular linear equation. You bring down 3x squared, and 0 plus 75 is 75. X squared is not by itself yet. You have to isolate the x squared. So you're going to divide by 3 on both sides, and you get x squared equals 25. Now, you take the square root of x squared to get it to be just an x. So square root, square root. What you do to one side, you do to the other. That means x equals, well, it looks like it equals 5, but it actually equals positive or negative 5. If you think about it, positive 5 squared is 25, and negative 5 squared is also 25. Negative times a negative is a positive. And that would be your answer, and you can leave it just like that. But I do want you to understand that it's x equals 5 and x equals negative 5. You don't have to write it this way, but you might see it written this way. All right, number 4. 2n squared minus 36 equals 0. Okay, we are going to isolate n squared. Okay, so that means we're going to add 36 to both sides, getting x alone, getting x squared alone anyway. 2n squared, or n squared I should say, equals 36. We have to divide by 2 on both sides to isolate the variable. So we get n squared equals 18. Now I go to take the square root of both sides and I run into a problem. 18 is not a perfect square. And that's why we spent the last 2 lessons learning how to simplify a radical, okay, or simplify a square root. So simplifying a radical, what we do is, well, the square root of n squared is n, so we could do that. Equals, now what we do over here is we break down the 18. So 2 times 9, and we have a bottom one there. 2 doesn't go any further. 3 times 3. Oh, we have a pair of 3s. So if you recall, the 3's come out because it's a pair. The 2 is by itself, so it stays in. And now we have to put a plus or minus in front of it. Okay, so your answer is n can be equal to positive 3 radical 2, or it could be equal to negative 3 radical 2. Okay, one more, just so you're not lost on these questions I'm going to give you. 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. We are going to get x squared alone, isolate x squared. That means we're going to add 9 to both sides. We have 4x squared equals 9. We divide by 4 on both sides, and we get x squared equals 9 over 4. Now listen, I know you want to do 9 divided by 4. Don't do it. Just write 9 over 4. Because look at this. If I take the square root of both sides, what's the square root of 9? Well, first of all, x squared, the square root of x squared is x. What's the square root of 9? Well, it's 3. And what's the square root of 4? It's 2. I just have to remember to put a plus or minus in front of it. Okay? So it would be x equals plus or minus, or x equals positive 3 over 2 and negative 3 over 2. You could write it as 1.5 and negative 1.5. It doesn't matter. Most people just leave it the way it is here. And that's all the problems I'm going to do with you. And now you're going to try some on your own. So hit pause and copy down the questions. So pause the video, copy these questions down, try them out on your own. There's 4 steps. Isolate the x squared, take the square root of both sides. If necessary, simplify the radical on the right side, and then your answer should be a plus and a minus of whatever you get. Okay, so pause them, try them yourself, and then come back and I'll put up answers. All right, everybody, so here are the answers. Check your work, see how you did. Figure out if you got something wrong, see if you can figure out how I did it. And if you have any questions, come online at 11 o'clock any Monday through Friday. There's a link on Classroom. All right, have a good day, everybody.